Secrets behind the white fence in the small American town of Blackwood, Pennsylvania, where houses with white picket fences lined tidy streets and the scent of freshly mowed grass hung in the air, lived John and Emily Crawford. At first glance, their life seemed like a postcard of the American dream. He was a successful lawyer, she was a talented interior designer, both in their mid-30s, attractive and ambitious. They had no children, but they owned a sprawling house with a wraparound porch where they'd sip wine in the evenings, watching the sunset. Yet beneath this perfect facade, there were cracks no neighbour could see, until it was too late. Prologue. A shadow on the horizon, it all started with the little things. John began to notice changes in Emily, who had always been so punctual. She started coming home late from work. Her phone, once left face up on the kitchen counter, was now always in her hand or bag, locked with a new password. She smiled more often, but not at him. Her gaze was distant, as if her thoughts were elsewhere. John, a rational man, dismissed it at first. She's just busy with a new project, he told himself. But one evening, after Emily left to meet a client, he found a forgotten receipt in her car from a cafe in the next town over. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m. Find Emily had returned home at midnight, claiming she'd been at the office. It was a small lie, but it stung like a splinter. John didn't confront her. As a lawyer, he was trained to gather evidence before drawing conclusions, and so he began his investigation. Chapter 1. Trails in the night the next day. John took a day off and decided to follow her. Emily drove off in her white Ford as usual. John trailed her in his old pickup truck, rarely used and unlikely to draw attention. She didn't head to her office. Instead, her car pulled into the parking lot of the Blue Moon Motel, a shabby place on the edge of town known only through whispers of infidelity and scandal. His heart pounded. He parked across the street, watching as Emily entered room 12. 5 minutes later, a sleek black Mercedes rolled up, and a tall man in dark sunglasses stepped out. John couldn't make out his face, but he saw the man stride confidently to the same room. John sat in his truck for 2 hours, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. When Emily finally emerged, her hair was slightly tousled, and a faint smile played on her lips. The man followed, gave her a quick embrace, and drove off. John didn't pursue them. He went home, opened a bottle of whiskey, and spent the night plotting his next move. Chapter 2. A face in the shadows. The following morning, John resolved to identify the man. He returned to the motel and slipped the young desk clerk a $100 bill. The clerk revealed that the man rented room 12 every Wednesday for the past 2 months. The name in the register was a James Wilson, but John suspected it was an alias. He pressed for a description. Tall, dark hair, a scar on his left hand, expensive watch. Something about it felt familiar, but John couldn't place it. He dug deeper. While Emily was out on another project, John accessed her laptop at home. The password was easy to guess at their wedding day. Her emails were clean, but in the trash folder, he found a deleted message from someone signed a J, sent 3 weeks earlier. You know where to find me. Don't keep me waiting. The sender's address was masked through an anonymous service, but John jotted it down. He called in a favor from an old friend, Ben, a private investigator from Philadelphia. Chapter 3. The detective's steps in Ben arrived 2 days later, a stocky man with greying hair and a perpetual smirk. He listened to John's story without interrupting, then said, "If she's cheating, I'll find the bastard. But brace yourself, you might not like what I uncover." Ben started at the motel. He planted a hidden camera across from room 12, checked footage from a nearby gas station, and even chatted up a local bartender who'd seen a James Wilson a few times. A week later, Ben returned with a file. "His name's not James," Ben began, handing John the folder. "It's Marcus Raines, a former client of Emily's, wealthy developer from Pittsburgh, married, 2 kids. The scar on his hand is from a crash 5 years ago. And yeah, he's not just hooking up with your wife. They've got something serious going on." John opened the file. Inside were photos. Emily and Marcus at a cafe, a park, in a car. In one, they were kissing. John's chest tightened, but then he noticed something odd. In the background of a motel shot, another figure stood, a person in a dark hoodie, watching the couple. Ben had seen it too. "Oh, that's no coincidence," Ben said. "Someone else is tailing them, and I don't think it's you." Chapter 4. The mysterious watcher John and Ben set out to identify this third player. They reviewed the camera footage and spotted the watcher's vehicle, a beat-up grey Dodge with obscured plates. Ben used his police contacts to trace it, but the car had been reported stolen 2 months earlier. Whoever it was wanted to stay invisible. Meanwhile, Emily grew suspicious that John knew something. She became jittery, checking windows and locking doors more often. One night, John woke to footsteps on the porch. He grabbed the handgun from his nightstand drawer and stepped outside. No one was there, but a note lay on the table. "She's not yours. Leave while you can." The handwriting was unfamiliar, scrawled in haste. John showed the note to Ben, who frowned. "That's a threat. But from who? Marcus? Or the Watcher?" They decided to set a trap. Ben suggested John pretend to leave town to lure the observer out. Chapter 5. The trap springs John told Emily he was heading to a conference in New York for 3 days. She nodded, barely interested. Once he left, Ben took up position in the house, monitoring the street via cameras. On the second night, the grey Dodge reappeared. The figure in the hoodie stepped out, holding what looked like a knife, and crept toward the back door. Ben was ready. As the intruder entered, he flicked on the lights and aimed his gun. "Hands up," he barked. The figure froze, then pulled off the hood. It was a woman, thin with short blonde hair and a wild look in her eyes. Her name was Sarah Rains, Marcus's wife. Chapter 6. The truth unravels. Sarah spilled everything under Ben's gunpoint. She'd discovered her husband's affair 6 months ago and started following him. When she learned Emily was his mistress, her mind snapped. She hadn't meant to kill John. The note and night visit were meant to scare him off, to clear her path to Emily. "I wanted her to suffer," Sarah hissed, hands trembling. Marcus swore it was temporary, but he lied. He was going to leave me for her. John listened, his world crumbling. He called the police and Sarah was taken away. But the story wasn't over. He needed to face Marcus. Chapter 7. The final confrontation, John tracked Marcus to his Pittsburgh office. Marcus didn't deny it. "Yes, I love her," he said calmly. "She wanted to leave you but was afraid. We were going to start over." John clenched his fists but held back. He walked away, leaving Marcus with his delusions. Back home, John waited for Emily. When she walked in, he laid out the photos and Sarah's recorded confession. Emily paled but didn't defend herself. "I'm tired of pretending, John," she said quietly. "I don't love you anymore." Epilogue. Shattered pieces, Emily left that night with just a suitcase. John filed for divorce, sold the house, and moved to another state. Sarah got probation for her threats, while Marcus ended up alone. Emily dumped him too, realizing he couldn't offer the freedom she craved. Blackwood carried on, its white fences gleaming under the sun, hiding new secrets. And John, sitting in his new apartment with a glass of whiskey, reflected on how love could be the most dangerous detective of all, unveiling every secret, only to leave behind an empty void.